Let's move on to another thing that a lot of globe earthers will say, that, the eclipses, all of this stuff were only predicted on the ball Earth model. That is absolutely, positively untrue. And in fact, the eclipses were predicted long before, millennia, thousands of years before the spherical model was ever even introduced, roughly 500 years ago. One of the devices that we have in front of us, well, let me go to this one first. There was a device discovered, 30, 40 years ago. It was called an Antikythera device. And what this was, it was a navigation device. They didn't even know what it was when they first found it, but it was found off the coast of a place called Antikythera, Greece. Okay? And they couldn't figure out what it did. It was all fused together because it had been underwater for an eternity. And what they found out that it did was it was a precision navigation piece of equipment that not only would allow sailors to navigate, but it would predict amazing things, eclipses, all types of celestial events. It would even tell you what color the moon would be during a lunar eclipse. This type of precision. And this device is over 2,000 years old. Well, fortunately, because of 21st century technology, they were able to x-ray it, break it down, find out how it worked, and they have since replicated it. And that's how we know that here's this device that was, has been around for over 2,000 years, and they were navigating with it, and it predicted quite accurately to within seconds lunar and solar eclipses both. Another thing that does this is a device called an astrolabe. And this is another amazing forgotten device that is several centuries old, was definitely around before the advent of the globe Earth model. And it predicts any type of navigation you want to do from it, your position, the time of day, eclipses, solar, lunar eclipses, all this stuff is possible with this particular piece of equipment. And again, it is centuries old. So the reality is when people tell you, oh, well, all of our eclipses and all this stuff were based on the predictions from the ball Earth, not true. Absolutely not true. And in fact, these devices predated this by well over 1,000 years. So that's just a nonsense argument. But yeah, you'll hear that.
And a nice connection with this kind of mechanism, in fact, with the Antikythera mechanism, is that it's belong to Archimedes, that mechanism, and the Romans was captured that mechanism. And if you want to relate it, we must be assumed, and we live under the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar before, which is made by Romans, by Jesuits. So they twist the history, and they took this kind of mechanism and device for antique civilizations, and they use from the heliocentric, theory or model or whatever, because we are living all the time under sun worship. And when you start researching history, you're gonna always find a few a few faction which is from Romans, from Jesuits, from Jewish people that control every aspect of our life. And that, if you want to understand why they lied to us, you must be research in history.
All right. Okay, so moving on. Next thing up is, let me get back to my little image here.
And as well, I'll just bring up about eclipses. If it was true that it's because of the ball Earth, then we wouldn't have to go back to the sorrow cycle to figure out how eclipses work. And even NASA, if you go to their website and look at any eclipse page at the bottom, it will say all eclipse data is provided by Fred Aspernak. So you would think if the heliocentric model was as cut and dry as they say, and you could just plug in these locations and get the eclipses, that'd be one thing, but it's not that way. They need to go to one specific guy who has studied the sorrow cycle, who then tells them how eclipses will work. So clearly it's not because of the perfect ball Earth model that we know when eclipses are. We have to go to a guy who has studied the sorrow cycle from, I don't know how long ago the sorrow cycle was for, I think 1,500 years or something. and then you have to go back then to find out how eclipses work. So it's certainly not what we're told.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, we have ephemeris data that goes back nearly 2,000 years. And once again, constellations have never changed. All navigation, everything is just the same as it is today, except with the current rotational periods of the sky. Again, absolutely impossible, especially when in 2,000 years, we should have had a completely new North Star by now. So how could that possibly be accurate? Well, that's a good question, isn't it? That's something that you need to kind of ask yourself.
And it's even older than I thought. The Saros cycle is several centuries BC, so even before, even older than 1,500 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So again, the claim of the heliocentrists that all of this stuff is based on our knowledge of the Earth being a sphere is ridiculous. And in fact, even going back to the Eratosthenes experiment, where they had the well in Syene and I forget the other place, where they were measuring sun angles going down a well. We find, and amazingly, Neil deGrasse Tyson even admitted this, is that it will work, if it's on a heliocentric model with the sun 93 million miles away, but it will also work on a flat Earth model with a close and local sun. It works exactly the same way. So you cannot go to the Eratosthenes experiment and say that proves unequivocally a heliocentric model, because it absolutely does not. And again, like I said, Neil deGrasse Tyson very recently made the stunning admission that is absolutely true. So kudos to him at least for that.